Big board, read all about it. 3 weeks in, and draft rankings are hot off the presses. Mel Kiper and Field Yates have much more coming up, plus we're responding to your questions, your takes, and your draft dreams. Live, First Draft starts right now. Hi, everybody, and welcome to First Draft. You can hear us and see us every week this college football season on Thursday afternoons, live on the NFL on ESPN YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. Alongside the men you want to hear from, Mel Kiper Jr. and Field Yates. I am Greeny. We will address that sling that Field has on since last we were all together. He had the shoulder surgery. We will most definitely dive headlong into that, but we must begin with this. Mel Kiper's second early big board is available now on ESPN.com, and it'll be available every single Friday. 3 weeks into the college season, we're going to run through the top three players at quarterback, wide receiver, and defensive back on Mel's board. So let's start right at the top. Mel, who is number one among the quarterbacks on the big board?
Well, when you look at it right now, and I'm looking at Carson Beck's at number 8, Green, I got the big board right in front of me, and I couldn't change it too much after a couple of weeks because you don't want to overreact. But Carson Beck, I think the fact that he's accurate to all levels, he's a decision maker, he manages things, he's not going to take undue chances, undue risks. And this team doesn't have Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey any longer. And they're adjusting. He's had an injury on the offensive line with Tate Ratledge going down. And even, Kirby Smart said in that game against Kentucky up front, they were a little bit of struggles there controlling things. But Ratledge's injury is going to be for a little bit. He's had the tightrope surgery. But in terms of Carson Beck, he's still right there. Quinn Ewers and Shedeur Sanders, I was trying to figure that out, went with Ewers, now injured. We'll see when he comes back. They got some tough games coming up the middle of October. Talk about the Red River rivalry will be one of those games. Then you look at the schedule maker and the way it's going to be for these quarterbacks. Talking about games coming up, they're going to be good, really evaluation games because their personnel is better than the opposition. Shedeur Sanders, guys, that's not the case. And we saw Shedeur last week against Colorado State get back to the Shedeur that I've loved all along. Now, he did have some hiccups in that game, some layups that he missed, some throws that should have been routine. He misfired on. But overall, when Shedeur has a fighting chance, he can really dissect the defense and get you down the field and move the football. And he doesn't make mistakes that often. And I think he can be the guy. And I really believe this. He still could be QB1. Right now, it's a 3-horse race. Maybe Cam Ward from Miami gets in there. We'll see. But I think right now, once Ewers gets back, that's the whole thing. Is it going to be Arch Manning, Quinn Ewers? It's going to be Quinn Ewers this year. When he gets back, like I said, we got the Red River rivalry, got some really good evaluation games middle of October. It will be Quinn Ewers under center.
And just as for those that haven't followed it closely, it's an abdomen injury. Is it oblique or abdomen, right, for Quinn Ewers right now, Mel? So it's not something that we think is going to cost him significant time. And it's also something that when he comes back, we expect Quinn Ewers to look quite a bit like what he was prior to this injury. I would say this, Mel, I agree. So I have Carson Beck at the very top of my quarterback board as well, which some people might say, I watched that game on Saturday night, didn't look all that impressive. I hear you, and that's true. Georgia, I also thought, was going into Kentucky with the mindset of just get out of this game with a win, right? That's a very good defensive team that Kentucky has. It's got multiple players that could be top 50 draft picks on the defensive side of the ball. That was more of a find a way to win than it was showcase what Carson Beck brings to the table. But why I have him as the top-ranked quarterback on my board right now, and there's a bit of a gap between Carson Beck and the next quarterbacks in my overall rankings as well, is I think he plays with the most urgency, the snappiest of the quarterbacks. I think he is the most accurate quarterback of the group so far in terms of his ball placement, has the very good arm strength that Mel already mentioned, and has really good stature as well. This is a big man, is Carson Beck. So while I would say, to compare this to last year's class, I do not believe at this juncture of the season that any of these quarterbacks will be drafted higher than QB4 in the 2024 draft. Somebody has to be QB1. And with some of the quarterback situations around the NFL that we see right now, QB1 could very well be the number one overall player in the 2025 NFL draft. I see it as Carson Beck still in that pole position with plenty of games and plenty left for Carson Beck to improve the rest of this way.
So, Field, he mentioned Quinn on Mel's big board.
Yep.
He has Quinn Ewers 2, Shedeur Sanders 3. Is that how you see it again as of now also?
Yeah, I have. So I will be updating my ranking, my overall big board rankings, probably at least every other Friday, if not every Friday, depending on what takes place the week prior. And that has become coin flippy to me between Quinn Ewers and Shedeur Sanders. Not to be a fence sitter, but each one of them I think has strengths of their games that far exceeds the other player and vice versa. This past weekend, though, I love what I saw from Shedeur Sanders, as Mel just mentioned. And I'll say this, Shedeur will be a fascinating evaluation because, and there's no easy way to broach this topic. If you draft Shedeur Sanders, you are drafting the entire Sanders family, right, Greeny? I know you've already talked about this on your show, Get Up, a lot. It is a different dynamic than it will be for any other quarterback. And there is certainly some pressure that comes along with drafting Shedeur Sanders. But I will also say that I have impressed consistently with Shedeur in this way. The weight of the entire Colorado program pretty much rests on his right shoulder. We've talked about how this team has some serious talent gaps at every position that's not Shedeur Sanders or Travis Hunter, right? And in big moments, Shedeur Sanders has had some huge games against teams that I think top to bottom might be better than Colorado. So I was impressed by, and I talked about this all the time last year with Jaden Daniels, the clutch production from Shedeur Sanders this past weekend in a game that it may not mean as much on the national college football radar as other big games do. But Colorado State means a ton in that state. And I thought that Shedeur played incredibly well in a moment where his team needed them to have any chance of winning.
And there was some history there between those two programs last year.
So. Yeah.
Some of the things that were said, some of the things that happened on the field. So I agree. That was a big game. Let's swing it back to Ewers for a minute here, Mel. I had Mel on my radio show, and I informed you, because Mel is not one who gambles, but I informed Mel that at least as we record this, on ESPN Bet, the odds on Arch Manning winning this year's Heisman Trophy are 16-1. The odds on Quinn Ewers winning are 18-1. Now, things don't always work out that way because Manning's last name carries a lot of weight. I don't want to sound naive, but there is one way to look at that says Vegas is telling us, Mel, that it is likelier that Arch Manning wins this year Heisman than it is that Quinn Ewers does. So I'll put that then in the form of this question. Is there any conceivable chance that when Ewers is healthy enough to play, they decide to stay with Manning?
You can't. I don't think you can. And I really believe Quinn Ewers, for what he's accomplished throughout his career. Remember, this was a guy highly rated. I made the point last week ahead of Caleb Williams, Drake May, and J.J. McCarthy coming out of high school before he went to Ohio State. Think about the game against Alabama. Think about the game against Michigan. Big spots. He has come through for this football team. And Arch Manning, I think, understands it's Quinn Ewers' team. I think all those teammates understand this is Quinn Ewers' opportunity to lead this team to a national title. They're going to be a playoff team, one of the most talented teams in the country. They're at the top for a reason. They have some tougher games coming up. We talked about there's going to be some great evaluation games for really Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers. And when you get them against those kind of teams, against them on that same stage, it's going to be huge. But for me right now, no. Arch Manning's year will be 2025. And then we can be talking about him as the number one pick overall, depending upon how he plays. He was playing pitch and catch against a team that Quinn Ewers had that interception. Outside, he was doing the same thing until he got hurt. That was a team they were overmatched. They were dominating. Like I said, it was no big deal. So for me, yes, Quinn Ewers will be the guy. As far as the Heisman Trophy is concerned, Quinn Ewers was being talked about as the leading candidate. Travis Hunter, to me, is the best player in college football. I've discussed that before. But I don't get. And I always say, and I said this the same thing, when I saw that line of the Jets 3.5, 4 over Tennessee, I said, they're begging you to take the Jets. I didn't get that. I didn't understand that line. It looked like they were begging you. And it almost ended up where Tennessee won the football game. But if you bet the Jets, you cash that bet. I don't get, Field and Greeny, how you can make Arch Manning more of a favorite for the Heisman Trophy than Quinn Ewers. That I don't get.
Yeah. Green, does this remind you at all of when Bronny James was the most bet on prospect to be the number one pick in the 2024 NBA draft, which we all knew was never going to happen, but big names move the needle quite a bit, certainly in the betting markets and in the world across sports. I do not think that happens. There's only one way that I think it happens. I guess there's two ways that this happens where Arch Manning has a conceivable chance of winning the Heisman Trophy. One, it's Quinn Ewers' injury is terrible and it gets way worse and he's out for the entire season and Arch Manning takes over tomorrow and leads Texas to a college football playoff top 4 seed, probably not like the number 12 seed, like maybe a top 4 seed. Does not sound like that is anywhere close to the case with Quinn Ewers' injury. The other way it happens is that Quinn struggles so much that all of a sudden Arch Manning takes over and saves the season, which I also don't think happens because I think Quinn's too darn good to struggle in the way that would cause a change for Texas. My guess is that if Arch Manning was a real threat to take over for Quinn Ewers, then Quinn Ewers might have declared after last year's season, because I think he knew coming back for 2024, while he was entrenched as QB1, there was going to be calls for Arch Manning. So I actually give Steve Sarkisian, the head coach of Texas, a lot of credit for kind of managing this, because while it's a great thing to have 2 quarterbacks in the pipeline that are highly, highly regarded prospects, he also has to know that the minute one struggles or the minute one gets hurt, calls for the others are going to be significant. So I think it's going to be Quinn the rest of the way once he is healthy. And I sure hope it's as soon as Texas's next game, because I think he's got a real chance to continue to cement himself as the second best quarterback in the draft.
Let me just say this real quick, Greg. Georgia, Texas is October 19th. We've circled that one again to see Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers on the field at the same time, Georgia and Texas. And of course, the Red River rivalry is right before that with Oklahoma playing Texas. But for those 2 quarterbacks, and then you talk about Tennessee game for Carson Beck is November 16th. That will be a challenge at Alabama, September 28th. Carson Beck has 3 games, Alabama, Texas, Tennessee, that a lot of NFL scouts will be watching him. Quinn Ewers, as I said, Oklahoma, October 12th. Then the Georgia game, October 19th, are great opportunities because talent-wise, these teams are loaded. Like I said, Texas, to be able to, and that's for Arch Manning. For all the Arch Manning fans, there's a ton of them. He's going to have great players around him. Isaiah Bond's going to move on to the NFL. Well, Mitchell moved on, Worthy moved on, and Sanders moved on. They're still a great football team. Sark gets all the top recruits from the offensive side of the ball, and he's going to get transfers because that's the place to be, is Austin, Texas. So for Arch Manning, he's going to get them. Quinn Ewers has them. And like I said, we have phenomenal evaluation games coming up this year.
At the risk of belaboring this, one more question on this topic, and that is, obviously, I agree with you guys. Quinn Ewers deserves to get the ball back, and he will. And I think Arch Manning is in the unique situation, and Peyton and Eli both spent as much time in college as you possibly can. He's not in any hurry. But if someone were to say, Field, evaluate the truth factor of the following statement. In the long run, the best quarterback prospect on Texas is Arch Manning, not Quinn Ewers. Would that be a statement you would agree with?
Yes, I would. And that's going to sound like a shot at Quinn Ewers. It's not. It's to be more interpreted as, I do believe that Arch Manning has such a unique skill set, because where he differs from his 2 very famous and successful and championship winning uncles is that he's a good athlete, as we saw with that 67-yard run against UTSA this past weekend. So while he's not quite the precision passer that his 2 uncles were, and we'll see whether the brain operates at the same level, because Peyton and Eli, such students of the game, they outthought you before every single snap, especially in the case of Peyton. It felt like it was mental warfare. Every snap you were lining up opposite of Peyton for his long, illustrious football career. Arch is a really, really good athlete as well. And Quinn's a solid athlete, but he is not going to impact the game with his legs as much as I do believe that Arch can, which I believe is becoming a more and more critical factor in the NFL. We are just seeing very few statue-type quarterbacks or quarterbacks that lack elite arm strength consistently standing out at the highest level.
And this happens, Gritty, and this happens in college football. This last point. Jake Fromm was the quarterback at Georgia when Justin Fields got there.
Right.
Jake Fromm was a really good college quarterback at Georgia. The Kirby Smart trusted, and Justin Fields was working in from packages. He left because of Jake Fromm being there. Joe Burrow left Ohio State. Why? Because he couldn't get the job. Who's the better quarterback? Quarterbacks were there were Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow goes down to LSU. So in this particular case, hey, I'm with you on Arch. Arch has a chance to be special, no question about it. But Quinn Ewers had an incredibly high grade coming out of high school as well when you put him ahead of the 3 guys I mentioned, Caleb, Drake, and JJ. So we're not talking about Quinn Ewers being some guy that people didn't have a high regard for at all various stages of his career going back to high school. They did. But I'm with you on Arch. Arch has everything going for him. It'll be fun to watch him in 2025. But like Phil said, if the medical comes back and he's ready to go and we got those games coming up, Quinn Ewers is the guy that's going to lead them to a national title if they are going to do that. It's going to be Quinn Ewers under center, barring injury.
Again, Arch Manning is 6'4", 225. If anyone has ever had number one pick in the draft written all over him at whatever point he decides is the right time. I think he has it. Okay, so those are the top quarterbacks on Mel's big board. Let's go to the receivers. I'm looking at your top three, and I'm not surprised by who you have at number one, but I think there's a ton to be talked about in this. Mel, who's your number one wide receiver?
Travis Hunter is the guy. I love Travis. And you watch this kid, he catches the football so effortlessly. He competes. He's out there playing both sides of the ball and taking hits and surviving, and just a great football player. And I say, is he a corner? Is he a receiver in the NFL? Is he going to be asked to do both? I haven't made that determination yet, because to me, he's the second best corner behind Will Johnson. You could argue he's right there with Will Johnson. So, and we'll get to the DBs in a minute or two. But at the end of the day, Travis Hunter, to me, is the best football player in this draft. Where you play him and how you work him in the NFL because of his skill set on both sides of the ball. And I know everybody says it's tough to find lockdown corners. It's tough to find guys who can locate the ball. Some guys can cover, but can't turn and locate. Okay. We see that. We saw it in the Baltimore Ravens game with Brandon Stevens this past week, right? Some guys can get beat and they can recover because they can locate the ball. Travis Hunter can do both. So I think it's going to be very tempting and hard not to put him at corner and say, take away that guy. But at receiver, he's going to change that scoreboard. So again, Travis Hunter is a dilemma because he's so daggone good. But to me, we've never had a number one corner, I believe, in the history of the draft, but we've had Patrick Peterson, number one on my board. Champ Bailey was way up there, and Charles Woodson was way up there. How'd it turn out for those three guys? Patrick Peterson, Charles Woodson, and Champ Bailey. How's it going to turn out for Travis Hunter? Very similar. Only thing is, he's also a great receiver. So it's going to be fun to see how his NFL career plays out.
Yeah, I think that the wide receiver one debate is going to rage on. I think there are three names that I think need to be discussed, two more beyond Travis Hunter. The case for Travis Hunter beyond what Mel has already described is, so I would agree, he's one of the most natural playmakers you'll ever see. He catches everything that is within arm's reach, does Travis Hunter. He's silky smooth. He's not this overly powerful runner with the football in his hands. If you're looking for the guy who's going to catch the football, run through a defender, and then run through another one, and stiff arm a third, that's not what you're going to get in Travis Hunter. Instead, what you're going to get is the guy who catches the football and then no one touches him as he bobs and weaves his way through traffic all the way to the end zone. It's almost like when I've learned this more and more in the draft process, as I've become more and more entrenched into this analyst role, is that when you say something nice about one player, it comes across as a negative about a different player. So I'm not trying to make the negative Travis Hunter argument whatsoever. My wide receiver one remains Tetairoa McMillan from Arizona, who I just think brings a different element of size and power to the position, along with silky smooth routes for a guy as gargantuan as Tetairoa McMillan is for a wide receiver, that he gets the edge for me. But we're talking about a very narrow gap between those two players at the very top of the wide receiver heap.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, guys. I went back and I looked where ESPN had him rated. Travis Hunter was the number 2 player on the board in 2022. Just to put this in perspective about where they were. Travis Hunter was number 2. T-Mac was 145 coming out of high school. Yeah. So he was down to Luther Burden, the third, that we'll get to in a minute, was number 5. So we have Hunter at 2, Burden the third at 5, and there's T-Mac at 145. And certainly the feet of the quarterback has helped. This is a kid who has that kind of size and the physicality and the ability to just catch balls that normally wouldn't even be caught. I mean, you can be a quarterback with T-Mac and you can be off target and he'll make the catch. Where, so the margin for error, you think about different with T-Mac. So you don't have to be as precise and as accurate. He can go get the football. And I don't know many corners that can handle and match up with him. We see how those big receivers, when they are that talented and that gifted and don't drop balls, this kid has tremendous hands. Talking about Travis Hunter, so does T-Mac. It's going to be tough to deal with him. And I agree. I think they're both right there. And we got a third in Luther Burden the third, who's a pretty daggone good player as well.
So I want to ask what I think is a complicated question. And I want to give it the same, I'm just trying to avoid everyone yelling at me in the same way that Field just tried to avoid everyone yelling at him. But Mel, you have Travis Hunter as the number 1 player on your big board overall. He's number 1. You told us that last week. And I don't think anyone can argue with that. But I guess my question is, how much of that stems from his uniqueness, which is to say, he is so great at 2 different positions that I can easily understand why someone might then say, oh, well, he's the best player in the country. The problem is On the pro level, it is extraordinarily unlikely that he is playing both positions. So that's why I'm fascinated to see you have Hunter ranked number 1 amongst your wide receivers. So I'll frame the question this way. If he didn't play both, let's pick the one that you think he's better at. If he just played one of the two positions, would he still be the number 1 player on your board?
He's number 1 at really both. You could say 1 and 1A with Will Johnson at corner. I looked at different skill sets than T-Mac. They're kind of 1 and 1A at wide receiver. So when you put it all together, best pure football player. And the thing is, what would he be if he was playing one position? What would he be if he was just a corner? What would he be if he was just a wideout? What would he be then if he could just focus on one spot and you could put him slot wide, move him around on offense, get him in the back, do a lot of things, jet sweeps, get him all kind of stuff, put him in a return game then, do all kind of different stuff with a guy like that, as opposed to, guy that has to be out there for all those plays and had to put all that stress and wear and tear on that body that's not huge. I'm just amazed at the competitive aspect of what this kid is. And he's always smiling. He's happy. He loves to play the game. I love the kid. I love Shedeur for the same reasons. That's why for sure I'm got down a little bit at 3. He could be my QB1 because that's where I had him last year. And that's where I want to put him this year. That's who I really want to have at QB1 is Shedeur Sanders. We'll see if that works out by the time we get to late April when that final board comes out, because this is all only September ratings. But for Travis Hunter, it's a great question, Greeny. I just think if he could master one spot, which he will be able to do in the NFL because he's not playing both spots when he gets into his 4th, 5th year in his career, I do think, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, I do think early on in the NFL, he will play both ways. They'll sprint, and they'll say every play, they're going to be out there on offense and defense the whole game. But they will, if he's a corner, they're sprinkling this kid in on the offensive side of the ball.
I can see him sprinkled in. I just, the reality is he's going to be drafted by a team that's not very good, right? I mean, if he's going where we expect him to go, which could be as high as, I'm going to say 2. I don't think number 1 overall pick in the draft takes place because, as we know, if you're picking number 1 overall in the draft, you most likely need a quarterback. And even if the quarterback is slightly lower rated overall on your big board, you're still taking him over the slightly higher rated wide receiver or cornerback because of positional value. But you're going to a bad team if you're picked somewhere between 2 and 5 in almost every circumstance. And I just wonder how judicious that team would be, because Travis Hunter would become one of the most valuable pieces of that entire roster. Greeny, I have sort of been interpreting Travis Hunter's value on my big board as if he was going to play one spot or the other, which is why I have him as the 5th best player in this year's draft class. There are a couple of pass rushers, James Pierce Jr., Micah Williams from Tennessee and Georgia, respectively, who each of them off to a quiet start. Injury impacted Micah Williams, but those two guys at their very best, I think, can be special football players. Plus Will Johnson and Kelvin Banks, who the Texas player maybe we should have talked about more during that last segment is Kelvin Banks, who has just been borderline flawless so far for Texas. He is an outstanding left tackle. Those are the 4 that I have ahead of Travis Hunter, because I have been interpreting my evaluation of him as he's either going to be a full-time wide receiver or he's going to be a full-time corner.
Okay, so then let's go to the defensive backs. Again, we're looking at Mel's latest big board, which will be updated every week. And you've mentioned it already. You sort of have a 1 and 1A with Travis Hunter and the aforementioned Will Johnson from Michigan, who I'll let people know is the number 2 overall prospect on your big board. So you think these 2 guys playing corner are the 2 best players in the country?
I really do. I think Field touched on it, the Michael Williams injury, James Pierce waiting to get those sacks and get going to Tennessee. He's going to have plenty of opportunities to do that as well. Wait on Abdul Carter from Penn State evolving. So I think right now you'd have to say Will Johnson. I call him a stay away from corner. I mean, you just don't want to touch him. You want to just leave him alone, not let him wreck your game and have a pick 6 and do all the things. And in college, they don't have a ton of interceptions. Why? Because people don't want to attack Will Johnson. They just don't. He anticipates. He reads that quarterback so well. Field, another kid, highly competitive. What can you not like about Will Johnson? So in any year where you have Travis, when would you have a Travis Hunter and a Will Johnson coming out the same year? I mean, those are elite cover men. And Will Johnson, I put him at 2. If it wasn't for Travis Hunter, he would be at 1. We've never had a corner go number 1 in the draft, right? Yeah. Never had it. But we've had some great ones. But are you going to force a quarterback up that high? The pass rushers, I get it, but they got to start getting some sacks, because if you can't do it in college, you can't be a number 1 pick in the draft. So I'm about these guys have already shown they can do it. But for Michael Williams, the stats haven't been, the production hasn't been off the charts yet. We hoped it would be this year. So far, because of the injury, he hasn't had that opportunity. Pierce did have the numbers last year. So we'll see how that goes. I think Pierce has a better shot right now. But overall, Will Johnson is a guy you just want to avoid at all costs if you can.
Yeah, there are certain players that when you see it, they're really, really good. But when you're actually formulating your big board of who's 1 versus who is 25, we're currently ranking players 1 through 25. It takes more than just, the initial eye test to tell you exactly where this guy slots. I knew Will Johnson was good. Anybody could have known that Will Johnson was really good. But the game, I should say, that took me from this kid is incredibly good to this kid might be rare was the Purdue game in 2023. And the reason why I bring that up specifically is Purdue had a wide receiver who's now at Oklahoma, Deontay Burks. This is a piece of dynamite in the slot, right? This guy is incredibly quick, can change directions with the best of the wide receivers. I could see him going in the first 2 rounds of this year's upcoming draft. That's what kind of athlete he is. Will Johnson, 6'2", 205, 210 pounds, matches up with the jitterbug type quickness in the slot or on the perimeter of Deontay Burks. You're saying to yourself, okay, now we might be onto something here because, these big corners at 6'2", 210 pounds, you're going to utilize them against the Mike Evans of the world, these big 6'3" hulking wide receivers. But if they can also hold their own against some of these guys that are as good laterally as they are vertically, then you've got something special. That was when I felt like Will Johnson had sold me that we're not talking about a darn good player. We're talking about perhaps the best draft eligible prospect, regardless of position in the entire class. Nothing since then has dissuaded me to feel differently about Will Johnson. I don't know what Michigan's rest of season looks like. They, of course, have now made a quarterback change going into week 4 of the college football season, but I don't care whether they finish the season with 1 loss or 5 losses. Will Johnson will not be the problem for any struggles Michigan has this season.
Yeah, let me say this. I said avoid at all costs if you're a quarterback. You don't avoid at all costs if you're drafting. Okay, so when I said don't avoid, the only people avoid Will Johnson is the opposing quarterback because you want to stay away from that kid because he will pick it and he will go. So again, a kid who was coming out of high school, he was number 23 on the board. We talked about where Travis Hunter was, and by the way, we get to a safety coming up, Greeny, and go right ahead. You read his name because I don't know how you can't love this kid.
Yeah. So let's do that then. Let's do Starks and let's do Benjamin Morrison. So we fill out your top defensive backs. And then I want to circle back to a quick note on Will Johnson. But go ahead. Take us to the safety from Georgia.
Malaki Starks. And Malaki Starks coming out of high school was number 12 on the board. And you watch this kid play, the range that he has field. And I brought up the kid from BYU last week, Jack Kelly. Just the range and to go from Malaki Starks covers so much ground. And in today's game, you got to be able to do that. And I watched Ed Reed and what he was able to do throughout his career. I think Malaki Starks has like 6-7 career interceptions now. 6 may be the number, but Ed Reed had that ability to see things and react so quickly, like he knew what to play. Malaki Starks gives you that same thing. He can get you on the blitz. He's a versatile kid. He just has that instinctive quality that you want. So I have Malaki Starks 5 on the board. At least I did last week. I'm going to work on that tonight and tomorrow for Friday morning. That's Friday morning, every Friday morning updated top 25, top 10. Field has his coming out as well. So I'm going to be working on that over the next couple of days to finalize that for Friday. But Malaki Starks is one of my favorite players in this draft.
There is a real fool's errand when you latch onto just one play or one game for a player because your eyes can deceive you with one play or one game. And there are other times where one play or one game can tell a lot of the story of a player. I remember this when Kyle Hamilton was coming out of Notre Dame and ended up sliding to the Baltimore Ravens to pick number 14, which a pick that never made any sense how he got to number 14. And it looks even more foolish now as he has established himself as perhaps the best defensive back in the entire NFL, regardless of safety or corner. But there was an interception that Kyle Hamilton made against Florida State for Notre Dame. And it was like this prowling sideline to sideline interception where you're like, how could somebody at that size cover that much ground and intercept that pass? And I think Malaki Starks' opening game interception against Clemson this year might be replayed every time we talk about him on TV from now until the draft. And it might never get old because I do think it kind of encapsulate what makes Malaki Starks so special is he's an incredibly fluid athlete for a player of his size. He's not Kyle Hamilton big, but he's got plenty good size here. And to make the play on the ball, to rotate his body midair, to bring the pass down. You know, they make the old joke that defensive backs are just wide receivers who can't catch. Malaki Starks can catch too. Such a unique player who's so versatile. And if you can play defensive back for Kirby Smart or Nick Saban, it means you're smart. So you know that Malaki Starks is a smart football player as well. I've got him inside my top 10 prospects.
And just to then circle back as promised to Will Johnson, Michigan will have huge spotlight games. They have Oregon coming up. They, of course, have Ohio State. And this weekend, they play USC. And I just would like to see if you two share this. Maybe this is just my Big Ten roots. But the idea that Michigan and USC are playing each other and it isn't the Rose Bowl, I can't get past it. Like, I'm sure at some point I'll get used to it, right, Field? But, like, at this moment, the idea that these teams are playing each other, it should be New Year's Day and right? And we should have the parade. And there is – my brain cannot comprehend Michigan, USC in September.
I was watching when the Alabama Wisconsin game started this past Saturday. I thought, you know, I've been paying pretty close attention to the conference realignment, but there's no way Alabama's now in the Big Ten, is there? Like, that's what has happened in college football. Yes. I did not even realize this was a Big Ten game, which I just thought this might have been another out-of-conference game for Michigan and USC, like one of those signature games. It is a completely upside-down world that we live in. And every time I open up, ESPN.com, Pete Thamel's reporting about some school that's on the radar of some other conference. We are in a bizarre world, my friends. We need to, at the very least, we need to rename these conferences. The Big Ten cannot be the Big Ten when there's 18 teams, Mel.
No, and guys, I hated this when it originally happened. I hated all this. I wanted geography to matter with conferences. And, I'm the old guy here, and I hated it. I was screaming. And then I thought about it during the summer. And, you get time to relax and just think. I said, why not? I mean, the Rose Bowl is one game. And so we didn't have Pac-12 Big Ten. So now we got Pac-12 Big Ten, and we got like Christmas in July. Okay. Yeah. It's like, okay, now we got it. We got it going here. So the matchups are incredible. It creates more of that. I'm not going to fight it. I actually like it now. Just give me the matchups. Give us what we want. I don't have to wait for it any longer, Greeny. So for me, Field, I'll take it. I'll take it in September. I'll take it. I'll take these matchups because they're great for college football, and they're great to look forward to, and they provide great evaluation games for us.
That last point does matter. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I love it too. And we are, the sport has never been bigger, and it's in that regard never been better. But I'm having a very hard time letting it sink in that Michigan and USC are meeting in a conference game this weekend. Okay, let me go to some of the tweets. I always promise, and I talk about this on radio and TV, and all of us post about it on Twitter X, that we will take your questions every single week on this podcast. Just tweet them at us using the hashtag #FirstDraft. And let's use one of them, Mel, to set up a topic that became a big deal on the TV show this week. You went super viral after your comments on Tuesday about Bryce Young. And after we're finished recording, Mel, we'll explain to you what that means. But anyway, this is a tweet. H3INZ57 tweets, Mel, for Bryce Young to get benched this early is ridiculous. He definitely needs more time, reps, and talent around him. I think he still has the chance to thrive, but as history shows, it will be harder to do if he stays in Carolina. They're a joke. This podcast is designed for NFL draft-related topics. I think this is one. I think not only was Bryce Young a great college player, he was the first pick in the draft, whatever that is, 16 months ago, and the development of young quarterbacks, I think, is a really appropriate topic for us to dive into here. So, Mel, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I don't know what they're doing. I really don't. I think anything you do, you got to have a plan. I hope the plan is, this is what I would hope. If you're benching Bryce Young, you have a conversation with Bryce, just sit. Your confidence is shattered. That's an issue for a young, he's only 23 years of age. You don't want to lose him or have him get to a point where he loses that feel like I got to be out there. Andy Dalton's going to be 37. Andy Dalton's won a lot of football games. Let him go out for a couple weeks. Let Bryce sit back and watch. There's nothing wrong with it. It's happened before in the NFL to great quarterbacks early in their career, and it's benefited them. Okay. I'm old school, and I think it's the best school. So I think the reason why you would sit him is for that. If the reason you're sitting him and you're benching him is for good, then we're done. We've seen enough. I don't know how you can. Dan Morgan was the assistant GM when they drafted him. Yeah. Okay. People say he's not the GM and he's not the head coach, this guy, Canales, but he's the GM. The assistant GM is now the GM. And he said, I love Bryce. What changed? He had some pretty good games last year. Okay. Remember the Green Bay game? I remember that he beat CJ Stroud. I looked at 3 games. He threw multiple picks. I think he was like 5 and 7 touchdown interceptions, but in the games he didn't, he was 6 touchdowns, 3 picks. He's a rookie quarterback when the team wasn't very good. They brought some linemen in. They had some pieces in the draft. 2 games in, when you didn't even play him in the preseason, except for 1 series, and other quarterbacks felt the need to play because they were new systems like Derek Carr, and you didn't put him out there for 1 series. Okay, I understand joint practices, how important they are, but other quarterbacks felt the game meant something. And then to bench him here, if the benching is for the reason I said, to let him sit a little bit, regain confidence, watch the veteran go about his business for a couple of weeks, then get Bryce back in there. But if the idea is that we're done with Bryce, it makes no sense to me.
We are in this league now, and this has been talked a lot over the past couple of weeks, where defenses are taking away vertical shots more than ever. Defenses are playing, not to bore people with X's and O's, and I'm no Dan Orlovsky, but a lot of too high safety looks. And the idea is if you're going to beat us, you're going to have to work your butt off.
That should be outlawed, by the way, Phil. That should be outlawed.
Too high safeties? You don't like that? Yeah.
When you go to games, I've been there a ton of Raven games.
Yeah.
And it was years ago when this all started. And I'm sitting there and Lauren was with me. I said, what are these guys doing at? They're like 30 yards off the back. Yeah. I go, where are they? They're out in outer space somewhere. How you gonna throw a ball down the field?
Yeah,
so
you can't.
Again, I would say we say where you have to line up. I would say I would put a rule in place that brings those safeties up closer to the line of scrimmage. I would outlaw that because that is ruining the game. The things we saw back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, we're not going to see now. The routes that we were working on then, you can't run because you got that going on. That should be outlawed.
Okay, so we're going to reform the kickoff rule and then the safety alignments. But the point where I was going to go with this is that what it means is you need run after catch players more than ever right now, right? Because you can't throw the football down the field. I don't care if you got the fastest guy in the NFL. Teams are taking away vertical shots. So let's now look back over the beginning of this season and last. And you guys tell me when there's a run after catch player that Bryce Young has worked with that is a fear factor guy. That's Mel's term, right? Fear factor. Who's the guy that strikes fear into a defensive coordinator? Who causes that defensive coordinator to lose some sleep at some point during the night? Adam Thielen, 33-year-old Adam Thielen, I believe it is. Not going to be him. Tommy Tremble, Ian Thomas, Jordan Matthews at tight end, Chuba Hubbard or Miles Sanders at running back. Last year, Jonathan Mingo and DJ Chark at wide receiver. This year, Deontay Johnson. You have to be honest with yourself about what you have surrounding the player. Bryce Young was put in a situation where the ceiling was very low, regardless of who was under center, because even Patrick Mahomes, universally regarded as and justifiably so, as the best player on the planet. Think about how different the Chiefs offense is now when they don't have Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce at his apex compared to where they are now with a much more pedestrian group of wide receivers and pass catchers around him. It's hard to play in the NFL when you're out there on an island, and 20 games into Bryce Young's career felt hasty to me to make this move. And I think that NFL owners have to take a long look in the mirror, because I think in some ways they're responsible for this, because owners are pulling the plug on coaches and GMs within 2 years. If they don't get a CJ Stroud player who changes the franchise's fortunes within 4 weeks of becoming the starter to begin last regular season, got to move on from this guy. The Panthers traded everything to get Bryce Young. And now it sure seems like they gave it 20 games before somebody, and it certainly seems like ownership may have been involved here, is saying, moving on, get me Carson Beck or Shedeur Sanders or Quinn Ewers.
Yeah, I mean, the organization, it is that organization is where careers go to die at this point. There's always a team like that in the league. Right now, this is that team. Look at what has happened for Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield since they got out of there. Look how well they're playing. And so maybe that will happen for Bryce Young. I guess I will wrap it up with this question, because I think it is instructive as to what they're going to do. And Field, I'll start with you. Run It Back Herbo at Run It Back Herbo tweeted at us. Who's most likely going number 1 overall to the Carolina Panthers? So, Field, let's live in a world where the Panthers have the first pick. Do you expect them to take a quarterback?
I don't think there's any doubt in my mind they'll take a quarterback. What they have done with Bryce Young, I get maybe, it's not like Andy Dalton's going to go light the world on fire in my estimation for the next month. Maybe they put Bryce Young back into the lineup. But the confidence is broken. The message has already been sent. They're taking a quarterback come April, and I think it's going to be very high. And I think it's going to be Carson Beck for Georgia, who I like as a prospect. He's the number 7 player on my overall big board. That's different, though, than being the number 1 player on my big board wire to wire last season, which is what Caleb Williams was, or the number 2 player, which is where Jaden Daniels finished, or the number 5 player, which is where Drake May was, who was the 3rd quarterback taken in the class. Carson Beck could very well be the number 1 pick in next year's draft, but the Carolina Panthers better work tirelessly to get him some pieces around him. And by the way, if they do get the 1st pick in the draft, that means they don't own the 33rd pick in the draft because they still owe that to Chicago as part of the Bryce Young trade. So I fear for the player that might go number 1, absent Carolina turning over every stone to add some playmakers to that offense, and acknowledging from an organizational standpoint, we're going to be patient, and nothing can deter us from being incredibly patient with this quarterback, because the idea of changing players out in the game of musical chairs at quarterback for the past half dozen years has done 0 to move the franchise forward.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I was with Carolina, the Giants. How many games are the Giants? Otherwise, screaming at Daniel Jones about losing that game Sunday, right? It's not Daniel Jones' fault they lost that football game, but they're going to lose a lot of games, looks like, this year. Carolina, you have number 1 pick. Are you excited right now, based on what we've seen of these 3 quarterbacks, to say number 1 pick overall? We're forcing them up. Field, I have Carson Beck at 8. Your first quarterback is where? What number on the board?
Number 7 for me is Carson Beck.
All right, 7 and 8. So you're talking about 7, 8. When you're picking number 1, what protects you from doing things like this is a board. Mm-hmm. And I remember Carl Peterson had said it a long time ago. You do this exercise for a reason of stacking these guys up on the board. And it protects you against that kind of, we got to go get this guy. We got to take this guy because of positional value, whatever you want to say. Yeah, I understand you got to take a quarterback. But over the long haul, are these guys going to be worthy of being the guy under that kind of pressure and that kind of scrutiny? Then it gets back to, where are we with Bryce Young in comparison to these quarterbacks? You grade them. You put a grade on them. Where was Bryce Young's grade compared to these 3 that we're talking about right now? We're not finished. We're September. When we get to April, where are these 3 grade-wise? Where was Bryce Young? What happened to Bryce Young between then and now to say he can't play? What has he done? With a team that's not good, and he's out there trying, and after 2 games, we're going to cut the cord. So what other teams are going to say now is, if in fact they are moving on from Bryce, where do we feel Bryce Young is? Where were we with Bryce Young? And how strongly do we feel about him maybe being generational, maybe being, like some said, Steph Curry type, right? Or are they the ones that I spoke to, a couple that said, size definitely is a big factor here, and we don't like a quarterback who's 5'10", 185, 190 to be that high a pick. So again, everybody wasn't sold on Bryce Young. I can tell you that for a fact. In the league, everybody wasn't. We all sat there on draft day and nobody had a problem with it because he's the great processor, the mind, so cerebral, so accurate, so precise, can move enough, even though he's not a 4-5 guy, can avoid all those things, right? So again, Bryce Young is the key guy here, because if you still feel that Bryce Young, organizationally, they feel we're going to get Bryce back on the field, 2-3 weeks, he's going to be back out there. Okay. Then we'll see how Bryce Young plays then. Does he show improvement? Do we see some things we like then? Younger players are going to have another couple games around the quarterback to get better. Where are we then? If they're going to eliminate Bryce Young from the equation and not play him anymore, then it's a totally different ball game. So how this year plays out for Bryce and the Panthers will determine what happens in late April.
All right, so quickly before we go, we promised it at the very top. Field, how was the shoulder surgery after your collision with a tackling dummy left you going under the knife last week? How are we feeling? What's our situation?
Yeah, the dummy is in worse shape. Just to reiterate that, he got the worst of it. I'm very grateful that surgery is now behind me. I've been overwhelmed by all the thoughtful messages of support to everybody. The pain is very, very low. The inconvenience is quite high. I have learned that I am much better equipped to do things throughout the course of a day, including being a father to 2 kids age 2 and under with 2 arms as opposed to 1. But when this sling comes off, which is estimated to be in 3 weeks, I might be the happiest man on planet Earth.
I tell you what, I mean, the dummy's on IR. I mean, you think Field is tough. The dummy's out 4 weeks, and they're not even expecting to get it back that soon. So there you go.
Hey, where's the trivia? Where's the trivia, by the way?
Well, I talked to Hembo. I do believe we will have trivia for you starting next week. Mel, we know how much you hate trivia.
You know, I'm just kidding.
And your hatred of it. No, we love how much you hate it so much that we're just coming up with ways to make it more intrusive so that
Just aggravate me more, right?
That's what we're looking
Like the Panthers didn't do it enough this week, right?
That's right. That's right. Yes. So we will wrap it up here so that we can off the air explain to Mel what it means to go viral. That's it for this episode of First Draft. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast. Tune in every Thursday during the season for full NFL draft analysis, and keep sending those questions using the hashtag First Draft for a chance to be featured on the program. For Mel and for Field, I am Greeny. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next week.